And you know how the internet is an echo chamber. And so a headline goes up and then bounces around. And it's like, with this, what's that game we played when we were kids, hot potato or whatever,
Yeah.
It gets amplified and taken out of context and maybe overstated. So there is maybe a little bit too much negativity. But, if you're a journalist, it's easier to write a negative story, or just, it's just easier to get in and out the door. Oh, this winery XYZ is closing, whatever.
Welcome to Masterclass U.S. Wine Market with me, Barbara Fitzgerald. In this show, we'll break down the complexities of selling wine in the U.S. by discussing the relevant issues of today with experts from around the globe. Each episode serves up 3 key insights to help elevate your winery's presence in the U.S. market. So grab a pen and paper and let's pave the way for your success in the U.S.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Masterclass U.S. Wine Market. Today, I'm very excited to welcome Cyril Penn to the show. Cyril is the editor-in-chief of Wine Business Monthly and winebusiness.com, where he leads one of the most influential media platforms in the global wine industry. He brings a sharp editorial lens to the intersection of wine, culture, equity, and business, shaping how the industry sees itself. So, Cyril, thank you so much for making the time to talk to us today.
Thank you for inviting me. Pleasure to talk to you.
Wonderful. Well, before we dive into our chat today, can you tell us a little bit more about your background and how you came to work in the wine business?
So I worked in business journalism. I first worked for Reuters, which is a wire service on the business side when I got out of school. So I have a passion for breaking news, which might be reflected in winebusiness.com a little bit. But I also later on worked for a peer review academic journal. So I also have a little bit of a passion for technology transfer and taking research and getting it out there and, making it applied research and communicating that. So that comes out a little bit in Wine Business Monthly, I would say.
Yeah.
I've been doing this for 20 years, more than 20 years, and have loved it. The wine business is so fun, and as you know, has so many layers of things going on. So never gets boring.
Never. Well, today we're going to talk about an article that you published in Wine Business Monthly on February 1st titled Outlooks and Trends, Embracing the Correction and Staying Relevant in 2026. So what I really appreciated about this article is you go well beyond we're in a downturn, and instead you're really kind of questioning what this moment means for industry structure, for capital allocation, for competitive positioning. So keeping that in mind, our 3 key takeaways for this episode and what we're excited to dive into with you, Cyril, are number 1, this is not just a volume crisis. This is a relevance crisis. So sure, an economic correction is happening, but it's also about how wine fits or doesn't fit at the moment into modern lifestyles. Number 2, we'll look at industry cost structure and how it was built for growth, but now it must really be kind of rebuilt for discipline. And then number 3, the fact that not all wineries are struggling right now, and the gap between winners and losers seems to really be widening.
Sure.
So yeah, let's dive right in. So one of the things that you kind of cover in this article is that the problem is not just pricing or inventory, it's relevance. It's having a product that is relevant to consumers. So you wrote that the wine industry really needs to adapt, but adapt to what specifically?
Oh boy, it's such a long conversation in terms of how we got to where we are and why are we where we are, right? And we've all heard it. It's been called death by 1,000 cuts, or however you want to say it. So there's a lot of things going on that are causing pressure on the industry, and the laundry list is, I don't know how long it is. There's probably a dozen things you could come up with that are all weighing in all at once. So, and it's not just wine, obviously, it's alcoholic beverages in general. There's less consumption going on. So, and this is the 3rd or 4th year of negative growth in an industry that grew every year, 3% compound annual growth for 25 years. So it's new territory we're in. So as you know, everybody is wondering when things are going to flatten out and go back up, or at least flatten out, right?
Yeah.
And it's like the economy where, when it's going up, you can't imagine it going down. And when it's going down, you can't imagine it going up. So we're all asking ourselves the same question, and nobody knows because we haven't flattened out yet. But we will, just a matter of when. Nobody says next year, but everybody says in 2 years. But last year, everybody said 2 years. The year before that, everybody said 2 years. But I am optimistic overall.
Yeah.
So this is a project we do every year where I interview the CEOs of the largest wineries by volume. So the article has two parts. There's a rundown of what everybody did this year. It's just like a little mini profile of here's who this company is and this is what they did this year. And then there's an article that's basically a compilation of quotes and say, this is what people are saying about the industry. So there's reports out there that are database that are great that people know about, like the Silicon Valley Bank report comes out, and there's the BMO report is going to come out this spring. But this is another way of getting at some of that stuff by just saying, hey, what's going on with you guys? So always great to get people's perspective.
Absolutely. And in your conversations with these CEOs, are you finding the relevance issue? Is this primarily a pricing mismatch? Is it the fact that wine is losing its place in kind of everyday culture, or a compound of those things?
Well, I don't know. Is wine losing its place in everyday culture? It may be. Maybe it never had a place in everyday culture in the U.S. We've been working on that one for a long time. But yeah, relevancy is definitely an issue because there's all these competing things now. As you well know, we've got THC drinks. The retailers are all in on that. And that's a big deal. It's taking shelf space away from wine at retail.
Mm-hmm.
There's all these RTDs, right? The RTDs are the biggest, category of spirits now, right? And unbelievable how much choice there is. So there's just a lot of distractions, I think. And maybe there's a sense that, wine was your parents' drink, and so you do something else. I don't know. But I can't imagine it. There's such an opportunity for wine to stay relevant and to be more relevant, I think. So hopefully that'll happen, right?
Yeah. In the article, I think it was Stephanie Gallo who was saying that we really need to, in order to grow this relevance, bring it back to being something that is fun, that is accessible. The desire for premiumization is, okay, we can't ignore that. There's margin in premiumization, absolutely. But if we're talking about the cultural relevance, do we need to widen that accessibility? Absolutely.
Absolutely. And this is coming from the biggest wine company in the world that has a product in every single price point in every single country that you can even possibly think of. And they're also the number 2 spirits company in the world now. Yeah, I think she's, pretty plain spoken about that wine costs too much and that there needs to be an affordable on-ramp for people, that this premiumization has turned people off. I think she'd agree with that statement. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. So that's part of it. Wine needs to be accessible. And then there's always the debate about should wine be accessible and should you make wine, should you dumb it down or should you keep it, more interesting, and give people more credit and all of that. That gets talked about a lot. But certainly it needs to be more affordable. And, one of the many things they're doing that I think is interesting are these single serve Tetra Paks that they launched this year, for example, so that when you're having a slice of pizza, you can have an affordable glass of wine with that. And just creating those options for people, I think, is important for growing the category and getting people into wine for sure.
Yeah, I know that's one of their strategies. What do you think about packaging? Is packaging a good answer for helping to increase, occasionality and therefore relevance? Packaging changes, I should say.
Oh, for sure. And we're seeing that with single serve. We're seeing a way more interest in box wines now, just for getting affordable by the glass programs into everyday, casual restaurants, for example. That's one area where, I'm anecdotally hearing there's a lot of growth, besides seeing a little bit in the Nielsen numbers.
Yeah. And then another big kind of a boogeyman in the industry, but do you think maybe we're overstating generational blame? Like, is Gen Z really rejecting wine, or are we just not giving them, enough reason to engage?
Like I said, alcoholic beverages in general are down all across the board. It is not just wine at all.
Yeah.
I think we can definitely do a better job marketing to people in general. I mean, that's for sure. But yeah, the generational thing, that's demographics. And we all know that there are fewer baby boomers drinking wine. They were driving the bus. And, Rob MacMillan, who authors that Silicon Valley Bank report, he was talking about this 20 years ago. He was waving the flag saying, hey, industry, wake up. We're going to lose all these baby boomers and we're going to, need to market to a new group of people. Let's do it. Let's do it. So this was a long time coming. And then it was like all of a sudden the floodgates, boom, like whatever it was 3 or 4 years ago. It's really true. So I'm a big believer in demographics. I think that is one of the silver linings. There's not a lot of positive stuff in that report this year, but if you look at, I think it's page 37, there's a little bit about demographic. There's going to be more 35-year-old and 40-year-old people coming online for the industry to market to. So there's an opportunity for sure to grab people who are coming into their, what do they call it, the years where they earn the most money or they have the most disposable income. So that is one piece of positivity that I'm excited about in terms of this whole demand question that we're talking about.
Yeah.
And then the other part of it is the supply piece. Just there's too much wine. There's a wine glut right now.
Yeah.
And that'll correct itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, especially when we talk about the California perspective and the position that California producers are in, I get a little tired of seeing kind of day after day, this winery is closing, this winery is closing, because you relay in this article that there's a lot more at work than just people are not drinking wine. We happen to, in 2022, have one of, this huge harvest that gave us such an excess of wine. And then we have the rise of farming costs, all these things. So there's so many factors at play.
Right. And you know how the internet is an echo chamber. And so a headline goes up and then bounces around. And it's like, what's that game we played when we were kids, hot potato or whatever,
Yeah.
It gets amplified and taken out of context and maybe overstated. So there is maybe a little bit too much negativity. But, if you're a journalist, it's easier to write a negative story, or just, it's just easier to get in and out the door. Oh, this winery XYZ is closing, whatever. It is true that a lot of wineries will wind down rather than sell their brands. And it is true that we're seeing a little more of that. We do what's pretty much the authoritative and report is actually in the same issue, in the February issue, about the number of wineries in the United States. And that's, going down a small amount. But yeah, like you're saying, there's all these other things going on beneath the surface. It isn't just this perceived drop in demand, this demand-driven decline we keep talking about. Like we were talking about at the beginning of the conversation, more than a dozen things. So there's the tariffs, there's just the cost of farming is a big one that people don't realize is just in California, the cost of growing grapes has gone up 50% over the last 5 years. It's incredible.
Yeah, that's
so
insane.
It's getting harder and harder to produce wines at certain price points. So that's part of it. This trade war with Canada, right? We lose our biggest export market overnight in one day. And you've got companies like Baby Gaylord, 100,000 cases of Cabernet, or for Rodney Strong, they were the number one Cabernet in Canada. So there goes 100,000 cases. Poof, or WX Brands, they've got, bread and butter. 450,000 cases of bread and butter in Canada just evaporate overnight. So there's many other things at play besides, consumers aren't drinking wine, because they still are drinking wine.
Yeah. Well, at the start of this conversation, you pointed out that, we enjoyed in the wine industry many years of kind of growth that, felt very celebratory. And growth like that, I think you said average of 3.5% compound annual growth. And that can hide some structural inefficiencies. And now we're in a place where they really get exposed. So
Absolutely, yeah.
Which parts of the industry's cost structure do you think are most misaligned with today's demands reality?
Ooh, that's a tough question. Well, all of the big wine companies that try to play in all the different categories, they've all been trying to play in the categories that aren't going down. So everybody's trying to get a sparkling wine because sparkling wine is doing relatively well. It was only down 2% in the Nielsen's compared to like 7% for table wine overall or whatever it is. Actually, it's up in the Gombergs last year. It's actually California shipments of sparkling wine are actually up. So somebody will play in that category. If there are a lot of the big wine companies are becoming importers. So if there's a niche that does well that they weren't in, they're getting in it. In terms of the efficiencies, it's brutal in terms of grape supply. I mean, people are just right-sizing, their inventory. The big players have too much wine, so people that were buyers are now sellers, and we know that there's a lake out there. And we know that that'll correct itself and has been correcting itself, and that acreage has been coming out every year. And every year at the Unified Wine and Grape Symposium, which is a big, big event in the California wine industry, there's a guy named Jeff Bitter, and Jeff Bitter runs the Allied Grape Growers. And he does a prediction on grape demand and what do we need. And every year he's like, well, we need to pull grapes out of the ground. We need to pull grapes out of the ground. And this year he was still like, usually he's begging people, pull grapes out of the ground. This year it's like, well, the grapes are coming out of the ground and we'll be right sized. We'll be okay because it's happened. So I think that's happening whether we like it or not.
And may I ask for clarification? He's been saying that long before we've been in the slump, right?
Yes.
So again, more factors at play.
Wine industry has these supply cycles, and because of it takes 3 years to plant grapes, we always react to trends. And then by the time we have the supply for the trend has already changed.
Yeah.
So there ebbs and flows in these cycles. So when we started this down cycle, a lot of people were assuming this was just another cycle, like there is every 8 to 10 years. But then we have this demand problem.
Yeah.
But I think people are making cuts. I mean, we do hear these headlines about layoffs. That's actually good news because the wine industry was in denial for the first couple of years about this. The wine industry everybody's an optimist. They're farmers. They should be optimists. It's good to be an optimist. They're optimistic by nature. And I think there was a little denial for a while. I know there was in talking to people, but that's completely flipped. And when people start making adjustments by saying, hey, I'm going to rationalize my SKUs and I'm going to focus on what's really selling and what people really want. And, maybe I don't need 3 winemaking facilities. Maybe I can do with 2 more efficiently and that kind of thing. It's going to happen. So, I mean, it's not good to see these headlines. It's pretty negative, and it's all, to see layoffs. But these kind of things are going to correct. And the good news is the industry is doing what it needs to do.
Yeah.
It is going to happen.
So do you think we'll see any meaningful consolidation in this time frame?
Yes, I do. Right now, buyers and sellers of winery properties are far apart on price. If you talk to the M&A guys, the usual suspects that are doing the deals, that are repping the wineries and these kind of things, at some point, something's got to give. And I think conventional wisdom is that when the potential buyers think prices have finally bottomed out, then they'll pounce and there'll be a wave of consolidation. But the kind of deals that are happening now, there's very few. And the ones that are happening are kind of supply-focused things where somebody has an opportunity that doesn't come along very often. Like you have a winery in Napa and there's a vineyard next door that hasn't been on the market or available for 40 years. And all of a sudden there's a chance to buy the vineyard next door. So people buy it. There's been a lot of those kind of transactions happening, but not a lot of brand stuff. And there's this mentioned in the article that we're talking about from the February issue about Wine Group buying a bunch of brands from Constellation. That was the biggest thing last year. And there were a few other things like Trinchero picking up Napa Valley and having a sparkling wine house in the portfolio. So there'll be a lot of opportunistic buys when it's a niche somebody's trying to fill or a category, but it's the matchmaking that has to go on is it's a lot more intense. It has to be a real match. There's also going to be consolidation on the supplier side that people don't talk about or think about, and that is all the suppliers to the wineries, the barrel companies, the cork companies, the equipment companies that make bottling lines and presses and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of change happening there in terms of the route to market and who's who. So anyway, to answer your question, yeah, I think we'll see some consolidation for sure, but there's a pause for now. You're also going to see some pain with banks, which is something I mentioned just briefly in that piece as well. All anecdotal, just scuttlebutt, but I keep heard it again today. The banks have been patient, but at some point they have to act because they're regulated. And, you have assets on the books that are worth, half what the books say, sometimes you got to move. So that'll be interesting, unfortunate, but interesting to see how, some of these things sort themselves out.
Yeah. Do you think we'll get, when the BMO report comes out, you think we'll get a little bit more insight into that or?
Ooh, into banks?
Yeah, into what banks are.
I don't think bankers like to comment on this topic too much. I know they don't.
Yeah. Well, talking again, though, about kind of the oversupply that a lot of wineries are faced with right now, how should wineries think about inventory discipline today? Because as you just said, we have these trend cycles that our own production sometimes can't keep up with.
I'd say go ask Ciotti or Turrentine or one of these wine grape brokers, and I don't know if they have the answer either. I think people are really just trying to be as slim on the inventory as they can because they don't know what's going to happen. And it depends on where your opportunities are. I think that the retailers are driving the bus in terms of what's being sold. So one of the things that's going on is shelf space. Wine is losing shelf space with some of the major retailers because there's all this competition in other categories. And the retailers are like, well, wine's in decline, so why should I, have big shelf space, have a little more shelf space? But that becomes like this self-fulfilling prophecy where
It's like
there
chicken
was less
before the
shelf
egg.
space, so of course the wine sales went down. You're like, your displays went down by half, whatever it is. But there's a lot going on with private label. There's a lot going on with the retailers that don't report into Nielsen, like
Mhm.
Costco. Well, actually, Costco's cutting down on their shelf space too, unfortunately. But people like Total Wine is doing pretty well, and you don't necessarily see that in the numbers. And it becomes a thing where it's what the retailers want is kind of driving this. So a lot of companies are being reactive to what the retailers want. And a couple of the companies that are doing really well are companies that nobody's ever heard of, like Precision Wine Company, like there's one called Navigator Wine Company. There's Sonoma Bespoke is Donnie Sebastiani's project that's doing private label that's quadrupled their volume in the last year. So there's opportunities. To circle back to your question, I don't know, but it's kind of like you have to line up the supply when you've got an opportunity.
Yeah. Well, this is a good segue too into this discussion or third takeaway of the kind of bifurcation between the winners and losers right now. So, what did you see, especially in all your research? What do the resilient wineries have in common?
Well, depends on how you're being resilient. So, like if you look at a company like Delicato's huge and 60 million cases plus and firing on all cylinders. It's a slugfest out there for them. But if they're holding steady in a declining market, they're actually gaining share. So they're doing great. There's companies that just have brands that seem to resonate or doing well for some reason, like Camus. Like Camus has Bonanza. Bonanza is doing great. Or Josh,
Yeah.
I don't know if Josh is still growing, but within Josh, there's stuff that's growing, like their C-Swept, because white blends are in.
Yeah.
So that's, with the big guys, like Precept Brands up in Washington is doing pretty well. St. Michel Wine Estate in Washington, has been kind of a disaster, but they went through the exercise of right-sizing their supply kind of before California did. So they're maybe coming out the other side. And then there's brands that just do well, like Rombauer, right? Rombauer, I'm told, is killing it. For Foley, Banshee is doing well. I don't know why Banshee's doing so well, but it is.
Mhm.
Then there's the DTC side. Right? It's almost like it's two different industries, right? And some of the wineries that are working direct to consumer are winning because they're doing a lot of the right things. Maybe they're investing in data, really doubling down on giving their customers what they want, whether it's customizing their wine clubs or whatever it is, on a smaller scale. So, and that's more hit and miss. There's some brands that are iconic that are going to do well no matter what. And then there's new stuff. I think people always want new stuff. And this comes back to the retailers. I think you'll see a lot of new brands that are value brands. This is kind of the dawn of the negociant. I think everybody's wondering why there isn't a new version of $2 Chuck yet. That would be $5 Chuck, $10 Chuck, whatever it is. There may be some breakthrough brand that comes out, but there's a lot of good bulk wine available on the market that's appellated. So, you can go to Costco and get some private label wine it's a Russian River Valley Pinot, but it's only $20 or something like that. There's going to be a lot of opportunity from all this disruption.
Yeah. And that is what happens in these down periods, right? I mean, it's what happened in 2008 too, is suddenly you see very, very high-end appellations available to a larger pool of consumers. I guess now the struggle is not just making the appellation appealing, but making the product. What is your route to market? How are you making yourself relevant with that consumer? Well, you mentioned DTC. So do you think that wineries that invested really heavily into DTC, especially during the pandemic, do you think that they're structurally better positioned now, or are they just feeling other strains?
Oh boy. I don't know, but I would think so, right? You got to think so. I think anecdotally, I've heard from some that, yes, they've invested and put more into their analytics on DTC. I mean, I heard that. Who did I hear that from? Heard that from Crimson Wine Group, specifically, in terms of really investing in DTC and seeing some results in it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the things you talk about too in the report in your article is, the rapidly increasing relevance of the fourth tier, e-commerce.
And that's just, there's so many layers to this. So you got Total Wine & More selling 20% of its wine online, right? And you've got people ordering stuff for pickup, and you've got all that. So it is a whole another layer of DTC that's getting stuck on top of this for people to keep track on, especially the bigger brands.
Yep. So we talked a little bit a moment ago about premiumization. I mean, are we seeing cracks at this price tier as well? Do you think premiumization is still really defensible? Should it be, anybody's pie in the sky strategy?
Well, it depends on who you talk to. If you talk to Duckhorn, they're going to tell you, yeah, premiumization,
Yeah.
baby, it's working for them. And they're a company they cut the number of SKUs they're focused on. And that was pretty well publicized, but their sales are up quite a bit. I've asked this question a lot. For a long time, people would say, I would say, is premiumization dead? And they were like, no, premiumization is not dead. You get that a lot. I'd say, and also, what is premiumization? I think everybody's costs are going up. So the price of wine is going up just because the cost of doing business are going up. And so I don't really think of that as premiumization. I kind of think premiumization has kind of run its course for now, but I think costs are still a real issue.
Yeah, definitely.
Obviously, it's so much pressure at every part of the business, including the distributors. I mean, and we didn't even really talk about that, but that was one of the surprises for me in talking to people, that I just didn't realize how disruptive the RNDC thing was for how many. It was 200 wineries affected by that, and they lost a lot of money because you get that distribution when you switch, but just going through the rigmarole of the technical side of getting the SKU,
onboarding,
all that stuff that has to happen causes this delay in sales. And then there's promotional dollars that get sent to the distributor, and it's like, what happens to those promotional dollars until you get them back? Yeah, on top of all these other things, I didn't realize that this disruption in distribution has been as difficult for wineries as it has been.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think that we're going to see more disruption in the second tier? What is your finger in the wind?
That's what you're saying. Everyone's wondering whether RNDC is going to, sell some or part of itself to Reyes Beverages, and we've, had this whole shift where wine and spirits distributors are getting into RTDs and into beer, and it's all kind of getting mixed up. And you throw THC into the mix, and there's a lot of disruption. There'll be more of it. I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, if you were advising a small to mid-sized winery that imports wine, this is the Italian Wine Podcast, so we'll say imports wine from Italy into the US today, what would you tell them to start or stop doing kind of immediately?
Ooh, for Italians?
Yeah.
And generally, this is not something I know a lot about, but my impression is that the Italians really value the U.S. market and are not backing away at all, and are investing in marketing and sales, which is what you need to do for the medium and long term if you want to build a brand. So I'm all in on that. In terms of like what you specifically should do or what markets you should be in, it's probably basic stuff like knowing that there's 50 different states, and trying to select what market you want to attack. And that, in terms of building a brand, is a trend anyway of building brands regionally, I think. Like if you're trying to build this big, huge national brand, wineries aren't always doing full-scale national launches now. They're being more strategic about, hey, I want to go into this market. And if I do well in this market and I have what they call it velocity, right? Sales velocity is how fast you're growing. If I have the velocity, then I can go to other markets. So yeah, I think it's that, and deciding where you want to visit, right? Because you're supposed to visit the market.
Yeah. So it sounds like what you're saying is just focus. Like we need more focus, not even just in opening markets, but back to the rest of the conversation, focus in SKUs, focus in who you're selling to. We can't be everything to everyone.
Yeah, and giving retailers what they want, because the retailers really are driving the bus more than it used to be. The distributors more, and not so much as it's not so much, hey, I need distribution. I mean, you need distribution, but who needs what? It's the retailer. So you got to get to the retailers.
Right. Well, I want to ask you one final question, because, I know that there are brands and farmers also that are struggling at the moment, and I do want to be sensitive to that. But it does feel like a lot of the reporting and the press has just swung the pendulum so far in the direction of fear. But when I read your article and the report, it just seems to be, a really, I think, honest look at what is actually going on in the industry and in the market. So, well, thank you. But given that, what was your biggest takeaway in conducting this research and putting this together?
Oh boy, what was my biggest takeaway? One of the interesting interviews was Steve Riebele from Riebele Family Wines. And they're, as you know, they're the company that's behind Stella Rosa, which is, this gigantic import. You can argue that they're onboarding new consumers. You can argue they're not, but I think most people would argue they are. Yeah. And just his bemusement about where the consumer is going and trying to stay on top of that, I thought was very interesting, because there's all these trends going on at once. You got the tiki bars and the rum drinks, and you've got this sweet wine and all the flavors, and you've got the retailers looking for flavored wines for special occasions. So I think it was just the fact that the consumer is changing so much, and some of the companies that are winning, so to speak, the big companies, we're talking mass market, are tapping into that and staying on top of that.
They're willing to incorporate things into their portfolio like pumpkin spice wine. I think that was Scheid family, but still,
absolutely,
if there's demand, give the people what they want.
Yeah. And I think the biggest takeaway was just how severe this correction is. I mean, It's like nothing the industry's ever seen. And that was literally how almost every interview started. Cyril, I've never seen anything like this.
Yeah. And you were talking to brands that have been at this, since the repeal of prohibition.
Yeah. And people have been in the business for a long time. Yeah, decades in the business.
Yeah.
So we're in uncharted waters, but I remain more optimistic than most people.
Well, to me, that gives me optimism, because from where you sit, if you've got optimism, then I think it's well-founded. Well, we like to wrap up our show here with a rapid fire quiz where we ask our guests 3 questions to just help our listeners kind of really better understand today's episode and the U.S. market. So if you can answer in just a couple of sentences, please. First, what is your number 1 tip for staying relevant in 2026?
Staying relevant. Oh, this will sound harsh. Have a reason for being. Ask yourself, why does my wine exist? It should have a reason for being. And if it doesn't, you should think about it.
Yeah, good answer. Absolutely. Why is it here? Okay, number 2, what is something you would have told your younger professional self about working in the U.S. wine industry?
Well, I wouldn't have done much differently. It's just a lot of fun. I think I would have liked to work some harvests. I never did that on the production side. And I think that's, if you're young and starting out, I think that's a great perspective to have. And if you're able to do it, I recommend it, even though I haven't done it.
Cyril, I would say never say never. Why is it too late?
Oh, right. Oh.
Okay, number 3, where is your favorite place to drink wine in your hometown?
Well, I live in the town of Sonoma, which is actually a little town, even though Sonoma County is pretty big. And we have an Italian restaurant on the plaza called Della Santina, which I like to go. And it has a little wine bar next door, a little Enoteca wine bar. So that's pretty good. And but my hometown is New York City. I'm from New York City, born and raised. And, I just went to Terroir for the first time. It's been there 18 years.
Very cool, yeah.
I was just there and I loved it. So I'm going to go back.
Nice. Some great plugs for great places to find good wine. Well, Cyril, thank you so much for all of the insights you shared today. If anybody wants to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Oh, they could email me, cpenn@winebusiness.com, and check out our website, winebusiness.com.
Amazing.
Thanks for having me, Barbara. It's great talking to you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I live in Kenwood, so maybe I'll bump into you soon.
Sounds great.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Masterclass US Wine Market. Thank you so much for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode and want to stay up to date with the latest industry trends, remember to like, follow, and share our podcast. And if you find value in our conversations, please leave us a review to help others discover the show and grow our community. Stay tuned for new episodes every Monday. Until then, brindiamo il vostro successo.